Hello, welcome to Building Department 101. My name is Bill Forte and I'm your host, the Inspector of Buildings for the City of Waltham. Thank you for joining us today. Today we have something a little bit different from what we normally do here on the show. We're actually going to reach out to city and town officials statewide with this PowerPoint. I've been asked by my organization of building officials to make a presentation to city officials to try and bring a better understanding about what a building official actually does and what the powers and duties of the building official are. And so in this segment, we're going to kind of bring light on what we do as building officials, where our authority comes from, how we enforce, what our requirements are for certification and so forth, and try to bring some, you know, some good points to being able to get support for building officials in and around the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So we're going to be speaking a little bit outside of the city today, but I thought that this would be an appropriate show to be able to bring that to light. So here we go. So the organization is called the Massachusetts Federation of Building Officials. We promote the public safety of all the citizens of Massachusetts by promoting the uniform enforcement of all state laws and regulations and local bylaws and ordinances relating to the use and construction of buildings, as well as try to encourage and provide a forum for the free exchange of ideas and information among its members. This is being very important. A lot of what we hear out there in the field from different builders is that in different cities and towns, the regulations tend to change. And what we do in this organization is we try to eliminate the inconsistencies from town to town or city to city by making sure that we all agree on how we should enforce the state building code. Local zoning ordinances are you know, different, substantially different from one another. They do have you know, some similar traits, but for the most part, each zoning ordinance or bylaw is unique to the town or city that it's written in, and for good reason. You go from a city to a small town, you know, the zoning regulations and dimensional regulations are substantially different. So, but in the course of, on the side of the building code, we try to make sure that we provide that we all kind of enforce uniformly in and out, throughout the state. So that's kind of what our purpose is. We have a unified voice if there's an objection to a code change, or if there's a code change that the organization would like to see, then we advocate for that. So we're not lobbyists, but we do advocate for changes to the building code and Mass General Law that make sense, that would pertain specifically to building safety. With only two exceptions, the state and federally owned buildings in and around any city or town, the local municipal building department has jurisdiction and authority over any one of these, any other building or structure. So basically, we provide that we oversee the construction, the legal use, and the renovation and maintenance of every building and structure, whether it's vacant or occupied, in every municipality in the Commonwealth. So your building official is the person charged with having jurisdiction on how buildings are built and maintained and constructed. So that is our sole responsibility and our sole authority. The International Code Council, which is basically what they do is they write what's called a model code. The United States has tried to adopt, and I believe it's in over 40 states so far, and I believe that almost every state in the Union basically has adopted the International Code Council or the International Building Code and International Residential Code. So basically what happens is that a state will adopt that as a uniform building code and amend those to specifically fit the uniqueness of that city, of that state or Commonwealth, to be able to adjust the code to where different, like, given an example, Massachusetts has a completely amended first chapter, which basically is scope and authority of the building official. It does mirror some of the regulations in ICC, but for the most part, it's replaced in its entirety in the building code. And so this is what every state usually adopts, is the ICC and the IBC, and then and the IRC rather, and then they make their own amendments to it because construction changes from state to state. So it's referred to in the ICC as the Department of Building Safety. That's really what we do. So our function, basically, we enforce 780 CMR, which is the state building code, also adopted as the ICC codes. We enforce the zoning ordinance or bylaw or zoning bylaw in every city or town. We also enforce the provisions of the Architectural Access Board rules and regulations. This would be more familiar to you, would probably be the ADA or the American with Disabilities Act. But it's an adoption on a state level, which is the Massachusetts Architectural Access Board is the body that's responsible for administering and regulating the accessibility of buildings for handicapped persons. Your Inspection Services Department may include plumbing, gas, electrical. It may include health inspections. It may include weights and measures. It all depends on how a city or town is set up. We specifically in the city of Waltham, we are the building department, but we also handle public buildings, which is not very usual in the Commonwealth, but there are 2 or 3 other cities here in the Commonwealth where that is set up. We don't necessarily have jurisdiction on the electrical department. That's handled by the Inspector of Wires, which commonly in most cities and towns would be under the jurisdiction of the building department. But we do have the authority in the building code that we oversee plumbing, gas, and electrical with the qualified inspectors in those fields and those disciplines. So we are one of 3 branches of public safety in a city or town. So we're recognized as a Department of Building Safety, so that is a branch of public safety. But in addition to that, the health department is recognized as an essential key element in the health and welfare and safety, if you will, in any city or town. The health department is always key. That's why you'll see the health department inspections usually grouped with building inspections, because they're similar in inspection process and in code as well. The building department in a city or town is the only municipal department that has the greatest single impact on the health and well-being and the economic stability of a city or town. What we do basically creates safe, habitable buildings for people, especially when it comes to the multifamily inspections. We make sure that those places where a property owner may not be responsible to provide for, or just may not be aware of what code requirements are in a multifamily home, we will go in and inspect and make corrections for that person to allow their tenants to live in a more safe environment that is you know, up to code. So those are the kinds of things we do. We handle anything from a simple building permit for a shed or a roof, all the way up to very complex projects, which may include high-rise buildings, may include special construction. You know, could be anything. Could be airports. Could be aerial communications towers. We have several high-rise projects here in the city of Waltham. Laboratory space, Class A office space. Our buildings range anywhere from 100,000 to 500,000 square feet. So we have the complexity of some of the things that we coordinate and communicate and regulate can be very, very complex, and there are some pretty stringent requirements for a building official to become a certified building commissioner or inspector of buildings in the state of Massachusetts. ICC sets up that testing standard, and there are 3 tests above the local certification that most inspectors have that will require you to have a greater knowledge of the function of the building department. I am a certified ICC building official. I've been certified since 2012. So I have the Massachusetts certification, but in addition to that, I'm also a certified building official with the International Code Council. That basically lends itself to being, you know, more adept to some of the code changes and being more informed and being a step above the qualification that I have here in Mass. So it's beneficial to any city or town for your building official to be ICC certified. And it's just a good thing to have. It's a good idea. What we do is we create safer, more sustainable buildings and structures by way of enforcement of the life safety building codes. Enforcement, we try not to use our authority to push people. Most of us, what we try to do is we try to bring awareness to the building codes and try to guide people to comply with the building codes. It's our job to communicate that code to make sure that people understand the importance of it and why they do it, and then enforcement is usually is a last resort, but we do have enforcement authority that allows us to enforce with a court order any building code that may be causing a detriment to life safety in and around your town. So we have a very key role in the safety of all the inhabitants of a city, whether that's a multi-residential dwelling, whether it's an office building. It's the everyday thing that a person will do. So we are charged with that authority to make sure that I consider myself, responsible for the lives and safety of over 100,000 inhabitants in the city of Waltham on any given day, and I take that very seriously. So every decision that I make or that my staff makes or that we make as a department could affect the life safety of a person. So we want to be sure that when we enforce uniformly, that we are factual in our finding, and that we follow through with our enforcement, and that we make sure that everybody goes home safe at the end of the day. So that's our goal. And I don't know any building official who hasn't been sworn into duty that doesn't feel the same way or act the same way as I do or as my staff does. So this is just an example here of some of the laws and rules and ordinances that we are charged with enforcing, where our authority comes from. Our authority comes from the State Building Code 780 CMR, which is also derived from the International Residential Code, the 1 and 2 Family Dwelling Code, the International Building Code, which is basically regulates all commercial buildings, anything other than a 1 and 2 family. Our authority comes from Mass General Law. Chapters, actually, sections 1 through 100. There are several sections in there that give the building official authority to enforce the state building code. It also comes Chapter 40, Section 21D, that gives us the ability to issue civil fines. Chapter 40A, which is the Zoning Act, will basically gives us enforcement authority with any city's zoning enforcement, zoning ordinance, or any town's zoning bylaw. That gives us the authority in that particular section. We also 527 CMR, that's the electrical code. 521 CMR, which is the accessibility code, and the various international codes are all basically part of the International Code Council family, and most of those books are recognized in the State Building Code as the reference or the default reference to that code, in which there is the International Energy Code, the International Existing Building Code, and we also enforce local zoning regulations and our local ordinances. Some of the general ordinances in our city we would enforce. And so there's quite a broad range of responsibilities that a building official may do in a city or town. It's important that they know their authority, and that all town managers and mayors know what their authority is as well. What do we actually do? So we ensure public safety through inspection of projects and plans examination. We don't necessarily go out and we don't coach. We don't go out and supervise construction. That's really not our thing. What we're supposed to do is make sure that the documentation that's provided is accurate and that it reflects what is accurate for the project. We inspect at certain intervals of the job at certain portions. It varies a little bit from residential to commercial construction. We oversee the overseers is really what it is. So we talk to design professionals and registered professional engineers. We make sure that their documentation is correct and that they have done their portion of the construction control. We also, through the zoning ordinance, we provide order, peace, and enjoyment of property through enforcement of the zoning ordinance or bylaw. That's usually a title page in just about every zoning bylaw or zoning ordinance is that in order to promote peace and harmony in a community, basically zoning is set up that way. So, and I know I've reflected on this in some of my earlier shows, but zoning serves a greater purpose than just aesthetic. It actually serves it has a public safety value. It's so you don't have a truck terminal next to a daycare. These are the kinds of things that zoning will separate. So by promoting that in certain areas there are single-family homes, that in certain areas there are multifamily homes, in certain areas there are storefronts and boutique shops and so forth, and then there in different areas there are industrial uses. The reason for that zoning, and this will be pretty much uniform across the United States, is that zoning basically keeps all the use groups together so that everybody gets along. It essentially, that's the primary purpose, is that so that when you go home to your single-family home, the person next to you is doing pretty much the same things at their single-family home, and so on. Commercial properties have their own operating times and so forth, and all those uses are grouped together for the reasons of it promotes harmony. So we also keep accurate public record of all structures. We're required under the records retention law. I think it's Mass General Law, Chapter 66, that we provide that we keep record of all structures and copies of plans for all structures until those structures are removed or taken down. We're required to have those records. So we retain all the public records from any building, anytime a permit is submitted. Those records are usually attainable at the building department during regular business hours with a proper public records request. We assist property owners with compliance to all applicable laws, codes, and regulations of a city or town. And I use that word assist because enforcement is not that effective until you've tried to assist somebody in complying with the with the building codes or with the zoning ordinances. It certainly is our first intention to always try to get people to comply with the law, and that's something that I believe every building official would rather do rather than just go right for enforcement. So enforcement's there, but it's only in cases where diplomacy might fail. So again, enforcement action when necessary. And the other thing that we do is we collect permit fees, provide financial reports on revenue, and create sustainable operating budgets. Very important that the building department pretty much pays for itself through permit fees. And that's what I'll go into here. Most building permit fees are not, they must not generate a profit under Mass General Law. So any building permit fees that are collected should go for the specific cost of what it takes to generate that permit, enforce regulations, and not only would be with the building department, but with all inspections. So it's got to cover the cost of everything associated with the approval, inspection records and retention of records and so forth. There may also be other departments that may not collect a building permit fee, but are still part of the building permit process, whereas inspections are required for engineering, for underground piping. There may be several inspections that a wiring inspector may do that he may only charge, or that department may only charge a small fee for, whereas that inspector has been out a number of times for various inspections. So, those permit fees are used for the cost of what it takes to enforce the building code and to pay for the inspections and whatever costs are associated with that, the running of the department, the buildings that they're in, and so forth. Building inspection departments require adequate funding to provide minimum public safety service. When there's a gap created in resources, it puts a calculated risk on the municipality and its inhabitants, which may result in a poor ISO rating. That's the insurance organization that puts insurance rates on different municipalities. So if your community doesn't have a good code program, we were just evaluated, I think, in 2015, but if your community doesn't have a very good ISO rating, it could raise insurance rates for your inhabitants. So it's very, very important to have a strong code enforcement department, because that helps to bring insurance rates down for all the property owners in a city or town. So and it also it decreases the life safety risk of of any building. So let's face it, if the inspector's around, there's usually more tendency toward compliance, and it's very important that a department is adequately staffed to be able to provide that service to the public, and it's for everybody's safety. The building commissioner or his designee enforces all life safety building codes under his or her jurisdiction and coordinates the compliance of other departments. We're also assisted by department staff. I have actually 5 inspectors that are appointed under me that have the same authority as me. They're duly appointed so that they can carry out the responsibilities and the duties that I, as the inspector of buildings, am charged with enforcement for. I also have administrative department staff that support the inspectors. So there's the bigger the city or town, obviously, the more help a city or town department may have. So we rely on the support of the appointing authorities and the mayors, selectmen, and city councils and town managers and administrators. It's very important that your building department be funded properly and that it functions properly to be adequate enough to serve the community in which it serves. In a small town like, say, out in Douglas or some of those other outlying towns in Western Mass, a full-time building inspector may not be necessary because there's probably not a lot of construction activity going on. And again, that would probably be that would probably suffice as a part-time building inspector. But where you have a major city like Lowell or Lawrence or Waltham or Cambridge or Boston, these departments require several inspectors to be able to cover what goes on in the city. We have here in Waltham, we have 13.5 square miles. We have an enormous amount of commercial construction that goes on, where versus the city of Newton has a great amount of residential construction. They're 90% residential over there, 10% commercial. We here in the city of Waltham, I believe we are 65% commercial, which may include the multi-residence buildings that are going up, along with 35% residential. So when the ratios change, that all depends on how your department, your building department, should be staffed. If you have a city or town with a great number of multifamily properties, it's advantageous to have a multifamily inspector. We have a specific inspector dedicated just to multifamily inspections here in the city of Waltham, which has increased the life safety factor of our city by dedicating that position as full-time. So, just some final thoughts. Try to support your building inspector and all the department heads with proper funding and staffing. We find that that we're one of those departments that we don't always get the proper equipment that we need, or the proper number of vehicles that we need, or the proper amount of staff that we need. It's very important that a building department functions in such a manner that it can serve the public and protect the public from a building safety standpoint, and that we have all the tools and resources that we need to be able to meet our mandate. Our mandate is obviously some of the laws and rules that I went over earlier, but more importantly, it's very important to give your building department the proper support that it needs. Always recognize the independent authority of the building inspector, but never hesitate to question. Our job is not political. Sometimes it's treated that way. Let's face it, the building inspector usually has a great deal of authority when it comes to the use and construction of buildings, and may not make everybody happy. But it's important that the building inspector has his independent and autonomous authority to be able to regulate the zoning ordinances and the building code that he or she is charged with, so that it could be so that everybody's interests can be met properly. And public outreach and education is the key to successful operation in a city or town. One of the reasons why I do this show is that trying to keep the public informed about what we do and why we do it, I think, is extremely important. I don't think that there's one building inspector that I know that doesn't put the effort in and really take all of these things to heart with the city or town that he or she works in. What we do is very important, and we would just like to have the support of all city managers and mayors and town officials to be able to perform our function and do it well. So with that, I thank you very much for joining us today, and have a great day.